We're coming off a week where it was just brutal for injuries in fantasy football, and yet the waiver wire was somehow pretty thin. This is why we always want to look ahead. Stash those players that could be valuable before you need to put those waiver claims in. Let's talk about some players that might not help you this week, but down the road, you could be very glad that you had him on your bench. My first pick is a player that's actually almost half owned across all fantasy leagues, and it's not somebody that's going to be a surprising name here, but Zach Charbonnet, the Seattle Seahawks, getting dropped across fantasy leagues, especially because Seahawks coming off a bye week, so they didn't play. But the first 4 weeks, he was giving you absolutely nothing. Definitely not playable in fantasy. And at this point, a lot of owners are thinking, why should I hold on here? Kenneth Walker getting all the run. He's looking really good. And Charbonnet hasn't been involved. All of this is true and perfectly reasonable. But a couple of things to remember. First of all, they drafted him for a reason. And that's because Kenneth Walker, as good as he is as a runner, he's not a pass-catching running back. He never has been. He probably never will be. And that's not what Seattle wants him to be. Despite Charbonnet not really getting on the field that much, Walker's only averaging 2 receptions per game, which is why they specifically targeted Charbonnet in the draft, because that is his strength. I mean, he's a good runner too, don't get me wrong. He could be a 3-down back given the opportunity, which is why he was one of the first running backs selected in the draft. But specifically, he has the skill set to complement Walker. He could be an excellent 3rd-down back. Why hasn't this happened yet? Because he's a rookie running back, and we see that pretty much all rookie running backs just getting eased into things, not thrown into the fire, and Seattle really didn't have to because they got Kenneth Walker. Charbonnet only has 25 touches in the first 4 games. His snap share had been steadily increasing until week 4, and then it kind of went down again. A lot of that, I think, due to game script. Rookies, especially a running back, tend to get kind of a post-bye bump. Get these guys, let them get their feet wet and experience the game, see how they can work into the system. And then after the bye, these coaches plan ways to get them more involved. It could happen actually in week 6. Now that Cincinnati's offense is awake again, this team at home could put up points. Seattle will have to try to match them. Seattle's defense not that great this year. So maybe we see Charbonnet on the field more. Maybe we see him involved as a receiver more. And also, what helps him and the entire offense really is Seattle. I mentioned this when I advocated for Session JSN on the waiver wire if he was dropped, is the fact that Seattle should soon have their 2 starting offensive tackles back. It's kind of amazing that this offense hasn't looked like the Giants in terms of just giving up sack after sack, because it's a patchwork. So many starters hurt, but especially their starting left and right tackle, who are both really good, Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. We're going to see a better run game in Seattle. We're going to see more involvement from the rookies. So if Charbonnet was dropped, I know you can't use him now, but this is a guy I think you're going to be happy you had long term. Now, hopefully the worst doesn't happen and anybody loses CMC, but you want to be prepared. Eli Mitchell was the guy who you thought was the obvious number 2 running back there and should be, except he's the guy who's always hurt. You can't count on him as a handcuff because he's hurt more than McCaffrey is. Since coming into the NFL, Elijah Mitchell has missed 20 out of a possible 38 games. The true backup is Jordan Mason. Mason got a little bit of buzz last year. He's a guy who's picked up a little bit because he was forced into action. Of course, 49ers didn't have McCaffrey all last year until the end. And Mitchell, of course, as I mentioned, was hurt a lot last year. So Mason did get some run and did a pretty good job. Last week against Dallas, Mason did get some run because game script allowed them to just run the ball throughout pretty much the entire second half there. And so as the number 2 guy, he looked good. He actually got 69 yards and only 10 carries. So while we haven't really got an extended look at Mason, so far from his rookie season and so far the early part of this season, 59 total carries, he's averaging 5.9 yards per attempt. I get that he may not be doing this if he was on another offense, another situation, but that doesn't matter because this is his situation. He is the number 2 running back right now behind Christian McCaffrey in the 49ers offense. It's pretty clear if you have CMC, you almost have to have Mason on standby because he's a guy you can just plug in there and know that he's going to get you some yardage. And if you don't and you're just looking for a high upside stash, I'm going with Mason. And then a very similar situation in Miami. We all know, devastating to have Devon Achane look like he was going to be the number 1 player in all of fantasy just to immediately go on IR. And while I do think Achane will come back at some point this season, it's going to be a few weeks, and even then, we'll see what happens. So everybody immediately assumes it's Jeff Wilson time, right? He's eligible to come off IR. He's been in that system, knows Mike McDaniel even from before with San Francisco. He's a veteran. That's all logical. But here's the thing. Jeff Wilson, coming off injury, also had his share of injuries. And then Raheem Mostert, clearly the guy there now. If you're familiar with Raheem Mostert from his days also in San Francisco, he's got a pretty lengthy injury history himself. All that said, we're going to have to look at the guy who could benefit if something happens to the current number 1 and 2 running back in Miami. So Salvon Ahmed now becomes stash worthy. Remember in the offseason, it was kind of assumed Myles Gaskin would make the cut from this roster. He didn't. He lost out to Ahmed in the preseason. Ahmed earned the backup job, and in fact, he was the number 2 running back before HN then took that over. Ahmed had a little bit of success here and there. He was a rookie back in 2020, and he ran for 319 yards. Pretty solid. 4.3 yards per carry. Hadn't done much since then, but then we see what he did last year in this version of Miami's offense, the one that's the same with the same coach, same players. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry. Granted, small sample, didn't run the ball that much. But again, we're looking for potential here. We're looking for a guy who could benefit from seeing touches. Ahmed clearly is in the right system for that. And then a wide receiver that I was big on in the preseason. A hamstring injury slowed him down. And the quick ascent of rookie Tank Dell in that Houston offense has meant that John Mechie was kind of pushed to the side. But I'll say now what I said before is that Mechie, I think, has the biggest upside of any player in this Houston receiving core. Now, I like Nico Collins a lot. I was in on him in the preseason too. Tank Dell kind of took me by surprise, right? I didn't think that he would come on, especially this quickly. But Mechie's a different type of player. He's more of a vertical threat, plays a different role than Tank, who's more of a slot guy, than Nico Collins, who's more of an X. So there's room for all 3 of these guys, especially with the way CJ Stroud has been playing. Also, the way this offense is operating, nobody saw this coming. Houston has the 7th most pass attempts in the NFL after 5 weeks. If the volume's going to be there, Mechie has a chance to be relevant. Last week, he saw his biggest snap share was up to 25 offensive snaps. Now, part of that was because Tank Dell did leave with a concussion. Dell's still questionable heading into week 6. But again, I'm going to say that regardless of what happens with him or the other receivers, Mechie could continue to carve out a role. And he's not a guy who's really going to need or thrive on volume for targets. It's going to be, again, those big plays, that home run ability that he has. So I'm still interested in Mechie. Of course, not ready to roll him out, but I'm going to see if his snap share continues to increase. And we're only a couple of weeks away from Halloween, so I think it's only right we talk about Michael Mayer. Okay, I know it's actually Mayer, but that's just not fun. Tight end Michael Mayer for the Las Vegas Raiders. A lot of people have forgotten about him because all the other rookie tight ends who have been so good, of course, Sam Laporta, Luke Musgrave has had his moments, and we forgot about Mayer, who's also an early pick. This guy was an early 2nd-round pick by the Raiders, so you figure they've got some big plans for him. Well, so far the plan has been for him to split snaps with Austin Hooper and not catch the ball. That changed a little bit last week because he did catch, finally, 2 passes for 39 yards and was targeted 3 times, which is an improvement over the fact that he only had 1 reception over the first 4 games total. This offense is so one-dimensional, I guess 2-dimensional. It's either give it to Jacobs in the backfield, throw it to Devontae Adams or Jacoby Myers. That's it. No other receiver is involved almost at all. Hunter Renfrow even. Nobody. It's 2 receivers and 1 running back. That's it. They should be doing something else. Giving the ball to the tight end makes sense. Rookie tight end, yeah, it usually takes time. It makes sense that maybe they're going to wait for him to really get more comfortable in this offense. This could be a sign that that's starting to happen. Now, it's rare that you want to go out and stash a tight end, but look, kind of like with running back with injuries, with tight end, so many disappointments. I know it was kind of like a get-right week for a lot of tight ends last week, but there's some people still looking for a solution. So Mayer's a guy, if he continues to see more targets, I think I might start to be in on him, maybe even more than a guy like Musgrave. All right, those are my early waiver wire pickups for week 6. We'll be back with more top waiver wire pickups, trade options, everything else you need. Don't forget to check out our playlist for everything you need to win right here.